1999, Sega developed and released Space Channel 5 for the Dreamcast, as the game would be considered as one of the launch titles for the console. The game was considered something of a paradox. The entire concept of Space Channel 5 was conceived by Sega developers with the original intention of having a game aimed towards a female audience or female gaming demographic base. The game itself had low sales, but critics thought of the plot of the game being original and different from what other games were being offered to Dreamcast players. The game's story had the main character of Ulala, a reporter working for the main news agency, being that of a 1960s style science fiction theme, competing against other news agencies. When an alien race called the Moralians begin attacking the Earth, Ulala reports on the events of the alien invasion, but at the same time fighting the aliens and clashing with rival reporters. The climax of the game's story is revealed as the invasion being nothing more than a stunt staged by Space Channel 5's own boss, Chief Blanc, to boost viewership for the channel. With the help from fellow reporters and support from her fans, Ulala defeats Chief Blanc. A sequel was released, Space Channel 5 Part 2, in 2002. The plot was that a gang called the Rhythm Rogues, led by a villain called Purge and his subordinate Shadow, attacked people with a dancing madness infliction. Ulala is sent to report on the situation, while clashing with other reporters and local authorities, once again similar to Part 1. Ulala later saves everyone with help from her friends and allies. The situation was originally that the sequel was planned from an early stage, but the implementation of these plans were put on hold by Sega development until sales of Part 1 were gathered by Sega from Western sellers. Once again, Space Channel 5 Part 2 was in a sort of paradox like Part 1, with it not exactly selling well in American or European markets, but selling very well in Japan, as critics commentating that the whole concept of the sequel was much like the original game, something fresh and new in terms of a plot and story for a game. The character of Ulala was actually received very well, even being called by some as an unofficial mascot for the Dreamcast console. Even Dreamcast owners who didn't play Space Channel 5 knew of the character due to the cross-publicity that Sega had for the game, and with relation to publicity for the console which was being promoted at the time. Space Channel 5 Part 2, the Dreamcast port, is now considered something of a collector's item due to not a lot of copies being made, and some players not even knowing that a sequel had even been released for the Dreamcast. A later version was released for the Sony PlayStation 2. Ulala's popularity was so apparent that in the early 2000s the character had merchandise specifically for her in Japan made, and the character even made cameo appearances in other Sega games of the time. Space Channel 5 and Ulala also received unwanted attention, as in 2003 both were the subject of a lawsuit made by Lady Miss Kia, an American singer. She claimed that Sega officials had approached her about licensing her likeness and music, but after she declined the request by Sega, they later used her image regardless. During the lawsuit, Sega was able to show that the game had been released in Japan a year before Kia stated that she had been contacted by Sega for using her likeness, and that the developers had never even heard of Kia nor her music. The lawsuit lasted for 3 years until 2006, when a judge ruled in favor of Sega and Kia lost an appeal. The singer was later forced to pay Sega's legal fees during the lawsuit, which amounted to $608,000. A minor virtual reality game based on Space Channel 5 and Ulala was released in early 2020. as the character was well respected by Dreamcast players, and many were glad to see the character and franchise had been used for the first time in nearly 20 years since Part 2 was released in 2002. The consensus now, when looking back on the games developed and published nearly 20 years prior, that the Space Channel 5 franchise was slightly ahead of its time and not fully appreciated during the time of its original release. Sometimes a character can be forgotten but not fully understood or liked by all audiences.